It was a cold winter afternoon in London, January the 17th, 2008. Heathrow Airport, the busiest airport in Europe, was running at full capacity. Dozens of aircraft were lining up to land, and among them was a British Airways Boeing 777 Flight 38 arriving from Beijing, China. On board were 152 souls, 136 passengers, and 16 crew members, ready to end a 10-hour flight across continents. No one knew that in just a few minutes they would face a nightmare scenario that no pilot had ever trained for, a total power loss on final approach, only seconds from the runway. This is the incredible true story of how a state-of-the-art airliner, crippled by a mystery no one could explain, glided into history, a routine flight across continents. British Airways 38 departed Beijing, Capital International Airport at 2 p.m. p.m. Monsieur local time. The aircraft, a Boeing 777-200E, was one of the safest, most reliable airliners ever built, piloted by Captain Peter Burge and First Officer John Cowan. The flight was expected to take roughly 10 hours. The 777 was the pride of Boeing, twin engines, long-range, advanced computer systems, and redundant backups for every major function. It was a symbol of engineering perfection. For most of the journey, Flight 38 was entirely uneventful. The aircraft cruised smoothly at 35,000 feet, crossing Siberia, northern Russia, and Scandinavia. The passengers were comfortable, the flight crew calm. Weather reports in London forecast light winds, visibility 10 kilometers, and typical January chill. But as the aircraft began its descent over the English countryside, something strange started to happen deep inside both of its Rolls-Royce Trent 100 engines. The first signs of trouble at 12:42 p.m. London time, Flight 38 was on approach to Heathrow's runway 27L. The pilots extended flaps and lowered the landing gear. Everything looked normal on their instruments until the auto throttle suddenly commanded more thrust. Both engines responded sluggishly. Captain Burge and First Officer Cowan noticed that the engines weren't accelerating properly. They checked fuel flow, pressure, and temperatures. Everything seemed within limits, but the aircraft wasn't maintaining its glide path. The 777 was dropping faster than expected. The pilots advanced the throttles manually, pushing them all the way forward, but to their horror, the engines did not respond. Both engines simultaneously were spooling down instead of up. The thrust levers were at maximum power, but the 777 was now gliding silently over the western suburbs of London, seconds from disaster. At 720 feet above the ground, the cockpit alarm sounded speed low. The airspeed was falling through 108 knots, far below what was needed to stay aloft. The airplane was now less than 1 mile from the runway. There was no time to troubleshoot, no time to restart, Captain Burge called. We're going to have to put it down short. First Officer Cowan maintained control, guiding the crippled aircraft toward the runway threshold. Beneath them lay the crowded borough of Hounslow, houses, cars, roads. Thousands of people below had no idea that a 230-ton jet was gliding toward them with both engines dead. The 777's right wing clipped the perimeter fence, the landing gear smashed into the ground, and the aircraft skidded through the taunt grass, plowing a 400-foot path before coming to rest just inside Heathrow's boundary. Miraculously, the fuselage stayed intact. There was no explosion, a miracle landing. The passengers were shaken, terrified, but alive. Of the 152 on board, only 47 suffered minor injuries. No one died. Emergency crews rushed to the scene within minutes. The plane had stopped only 1,000 feet short of the runway threshold. Had it been seconds lower, it would have hit houses, roads, or the crowded A30 motorway. Inside the cockpit, both pilots were in shock. They had just experienced a double-engine failure on final approach, something that wasn't supposed to happen on a modern twin-engine jet. As investigators arrived, one question echoed across the aviation world. How could both engines fail at the same time when there was still fuel on board? The investigation begins. The UK Air Accidents Investigation Branch, AAEB, immediately began examining the wreckage. Early signs pointed to fuel starvation, but that made no sense. The aircraft had more than 10 tons of fuel remaining. Engineers checked the fuel pumps, filters, and valves. All were functional. There was no evidence of contamination. The engines weren't broken. They had simply failed to deliver fuel properly at the most critical moment. Attention turned to the fuel system's heat exchanger units, where fuel is warmed by hot engine oil to prevent icing. investigators soon discovered something shocking. Tiny crystals of ice had formed in the jet fuel during the long, cold cruise from China. Over 10 hours of flight through sub-freezing air, those crystals accumulated in the fuel lines. Normally, they would melt as fuel warmed near the engines, but on Flight 38, they didn't. The perfect storm inside the fuel lines. When the pilots commanded more thrust for final approach, warmer fuel rushed toward the engines, dislodging the built-up ice. That ice migrated downstream and became trapped inside the fuel oil heat exchangers. The result? A blockage that choked fuel flow to both engines simultaneously. It was a 1 in a billion scenario, something no one had ever seen before. The 777's design had multiple redundancies, but none accounted for this kind of gradual ice buildup. The engines didn't flame out, they simply starved. The IAB's report concluded that both engines had rolled back because of restricted fuel flow caused by ice crystals forming from water naturally present in jet fuel. No mechanical failure, no maintenance error. Just a hidden weakness in a system that had otherwise been flawless for years. Heroes in the cockpit. What Captain Burge and First Officer Cowan did in those final seconds was nothing short of heroic. At 400 feet, they had only 20 seconds before impact. They chose to keep the wings level, pull the nose up slightly to reduce the descent rate, and sacrifice the landing gear to absorb the impact. Their quick thinking saved everyone on board. Later praised their superb airmanship and professionalism under extreme duress. British Airways honored both pilots, and even Boeing engineers admitted that the outcome could easily have been catastrophic. Engineering lessons learned. The findings of the investigation sent shockwaves through the aviation industry. Rolls-Royce, Boeing, and airlines worldwide immediately began modifying the fuel oil heat exchanger design in all 800-powered 777s. The new design allowed ice to pass harmlessly through the system without forming blockages. Regulators issued directives mandating changes, and flight crews were trained to manage cold-soaked fuel risks on ultra-long haul flights. By 2010, every affected aircraft had been retrofitted. The industry had learned a painful lesson. Even in the age of advanced computers and automation, nature can still surprise us. Human reactions and media sensation. When news broke that a British Airways jet had crashed short of Heathrow, headlines around the world screamed of disaster narrowly averted. Television footage showed the 777 resting in the grass. Its landing gear collapsed, wings scarred, engines ripped apart. But the tone quickly changed when it became clear that everyone had survived. The pilots were hailed as heroes. Aviation experts called it a miracle in London. For days, passengers described the surreal experience, feeling the plane sink lower and lower, hearing the engines fall silent, and then the violent crash followed by eerie stillness. One passenger said it was like the plane just gave up and the pilot somehow put it down. Inside the cockpit voice recorder, when investigators replayed the cockpit voice recorder, they were struck by the calm professionalism of the crew. No panic. No. Cows, just focus. Speed's low. First Officer Cowan warned. I have control, Captain Burge replied. They discussed their altitude, options, and prepared for impact, all in under 30 seconds. The calmness of that exchange was a testament to years of training and discipline. The aftermath. In the months that followed, the damaged 777 was dismantled and transported for study. Heathrow resumed normal operations within hours. British Airways repaired its reputation quickly, proud of how its crew handled the unimaginable. The event, however, changed how airlines around the world viewed impossible scenarios. The 777 had been considered immune to total power loss. Flight 38 proved otherwise, but it also showed how robust modern airliners truly are. Even with both engines starving for fuel, the 777 remained controllable. Its structure absorbed the impact without breaking apart or catching fire. Could it happen again after the fuel system redesign? The risk of such an event became virtually zero. The combination of circumstances on Flight 38, cold, soaked fuel, long-haul cruise, rapid thrust demand, was so rare that no similar event has occurred since. Still, pilots around the world studied the case intensely. Flight simulators now include scenarios of dual-engine rollback during approach. The lessons of Flight 38 live on in every 777 cockpit. Legacy of British Airways 38. Today, the name British Airways 38 stands as a symbol of quiet heroism. It reminds us that even the best machines can fail, but human skill and calm under pressure can still make the difference between tragedy and miracle. The incident also reinforced the 777's reputation as one of the safest airliners ever built. Despite the dramatic landing, its structure protected everyone aboard. A remarkable engineering feat. Captain Burge retired a hero. His actions and those of his first officer are still studied by pilots as examples of how to handle the unthinkable. Conclusion: powerless yet powerful. When most people imagine an aviation disaster, they picture chaos, explosions, fireballs, and the horrifying sound of metal tearing apart. But British Airways Flight 38 rewrote that narrative completely. It was a day when everything failed, yet everything worked exactly as it needed to. In those moments, the difference between catastrophe and survival came down to human skill. Captain Peter Burkill and First Officer John Coward had only seconds to act. They couldn't climb, they couldn't circle around, and they couldn't restart the engines. They had to glide, precisely, perfectly, onto whatever patch of ground they could reach. Against all odds, they managed to align the aircraft with Heathrow's runway. The 777 hit the grass just short of the tarmac, skidding violently as its landing gear collapsed. But the fuselage stayed intact. The wings didn't ignite. The jet came to rest battered, but whole. Inside, passengers sat stunned. There were screams, then silence, then the sound of seatbelts unclicking. Emergency slides deployed, and one by one, people began to escape. Miraculously, all 152 souls on board survived. Later investigations uncovered a previously unknown flaw. Ice crystals had built up in the fuel lines during the long, cold flight and clogged the heat exchangers, starving the engines of fuel. Boeing quickly redesigned the system to prevent it from ever happening again, but beyond engineering lessons, Flight 38 became a symbol of human mastery over crisis. When machines failed, training, teamwork, and courage took control. British Airways 38 will forever stand as one of aviation's quiet miracles, a story not of tragedy but of triumph. A powerless plane, a calm crew, and a landing that turned near disaster into proof of what humanity can achieve under pressure.